All right, hey, thank you. Hopefully you can see me and can hear me okay, and we'll stumble along here as we need to. I'd like to talk to you today about a dynamic that I have created with a lot of help over the years and have incorporated some of the understanding of those that have come before me as well. And particularly, this has been something that I have found to be particularly helpful now. Those of you that may be familiar with Harris's transdiagnostic orientation will find that some of this is also a bit familiar. But the thing that I have found more than anything else, and how this has been helpful for me, is in dealing with parents and helping them understand the whole notion of treatment as well, and giving them a concept of treatment that they can use and that they can use to engage with the therapist and be able to feel as though they are in the driver's seat as far as treatment is concerned. So we're going to talk about this today, and I want to introduce a concept to you here that will be helpful, and I hope that you'll see that it's helpful, particularly when we're working with adolescents. The first thing, especially for parents, that's extremely hard for them, is to have some sense of truly what is this condition that we are addressing. And as treatment providers, obviously the onus would be upon us to be able to conceptualize for parents, specifically, okay, here is the nature of the problem. You know, I'm going to define this for you. I want you to understand what the problem actually is, and then if I am a treatment provider, then I will also be responsible for telling you, here is the nature of the treatment. This is the treatment that this condition requires. And here is how that treatment will be offered as well. Then the part for parents that seems to be most refreshing is also the part where we allow them to understand, hey, here is how you can understand whether or not this treatment is actually having its intended effect. That really is the part that for most parents tends to open up some doors, gives them some hope, and also helps them understand that they have a role in this as well. So typically, as things usually go in this, as you encounter parents, they will be more than happy to let you know of their previous experiences as far as being able to have received a diagnosis for their child. And usually this is one of two things for parents. They find it only minimally helpful, or they find this to be somewhat of the holy grail, that they now are hanging on to this notion that my child has a diagnosis and there is a magic silver bullet that will be connected to whatever this diagnosis may be that will immediately impact my child's behavior and immediately be able to impact my child's coping capacity as well. And yet at the same time, most parents tend to be somewhat disappointed just with the notion of diagnosis, that it's only marginally helpful for them in understanding, gee, how did this problem actually originate? You know, what does this imply then as far as what needs to happen for my child? And most parents tend to be a bit disappointed as they continue in this orientation. It's helpful, you know, obviously it's helpful in organizing caseloads, those kinds of things, but for a parent, it's very difficult for them to understand what truly are the implications here that go along with just a diagnosis. And at the same time, recognizing that the students and the clients that we see are very unique in their presentation, and yet at the same time, the symptoms that they manifest would qualify them for having the same kinds of diagnosis, and it doesn't necessarily take into account the components of their uniqueness as well. So I think there is another way, especially when we're working with parents and especially when we are attempting to engage parents in the therapeutic process. There seems to be a better way of helping them understand how to conceptualize this. And particularly for out-of-control adolescents, I like to help them know that the real difficulty here, at the bottom line of all of this, is that their child is getting older, that they are actually aging, that chronologically they are maturing that way. But they're really not growing up. That's the problem, that they tend to be stuck somewhere in this position where, in spite of the fact that they're getting older, that they're really not developing those competencies, knowledge, and coping mechanisms that will be required for them to be able to manage themselves as independently responsible young adults. And what we are also finding then, too, is that these are adolescents and children as well who are not allowing themselves to be exposed to those situations and to the expectations that would actually allow them to develop this knowledge and competencies and coping mechanisms as well, that they are actually avoiding many of the expectations in their lives, and that they have become very, very good in this avoidance process. So what we tend to define then for parents is the idea that in reality, the problem that we're talking about here is a developmental vacation. This is how we can describe this to parents. The idea that my child somewhere in there is stuck at a less mature developmental place than would be expected given where his age is at this point in time. That being the case, then, there are some specific things that we can talk about that goes along with this whole developmental vacation as well. The idea that my child is not necessarily just stuck. There is some life energy that is going into what they are doing. But instead of putting their life energy into those processes that are actually now helping them develop the wisdom, knowledge, competencies, coping mechanisms, those kind of things we talked about before, instead of doing that, they are putting their life energy into those things that will assist them in the maintenance of that developmental vacation. And in this regard, then, these adolescents and these children become extremely gifted, extremely competent in their ability to maintain the developmental vacation. And it becomes incredibly frustrating for parents. This becomes one of those things where parents have those difficulties when they're trying to point out to their children all of the problems and why they are not growing up, and don't you want to have this responsibility? Don't you want to be this individual who is able to do these kinds of things? And it's hard for parents to understand that, no, children really don't want that. If I'm on a developmental vacation, it means that I want to stay on a developmental vacation, and I want the rest of the world to continue to treat me as though I am that individual who is on that developmental vacation, and that I can continue to engage the world in a less mature way of interaction. So really what we're seeing, the kinds of things that adolescents do to stay on that developmental vacation will reflect this immaturity. It will reflect the idea that the kinds of things that I am doing to cope with the world may be more appropriate for someone who is much younger than I am, but at this point, they're not serving me well. It's an immature way of attempting to manage my world. And the other piece about this is that I'm maintaining this incredible rigidity, and there is a cognitive orientation that goes around this of entitlement, but I'm maintaining this rigidity that the rest of the world must bend to suit my needs, that the rest of the world must recognize that, yes, I am on this developmental vacation, and that the world should sanction that I should not actually have to change, that it's okay for me to stay here, and I become incredibly competent in my ability to be able to maintain this position in my life. So, as we talk about this, then, another key point in all of this is the idea that the way that these adolescents maintain their orientation on this developmental vacation is that they are now insulating themselves with dependencies. And a nice way for parents to understand this is that if the child can find a way to engage a dependency and allow the dependency to more or less, I guess we could say, do the work for them. In reality, what it is actually doing is just insulating them from whatever emotional material is consistent with their life. But if a child can call forth a dependency to keep him from actually having to do the developmental work himself, that's what he or she will do. And the child's ability to manage these dependencies becomes the area of their life where their focus becomes, the primary focus becomes being able to call forth dependencies. Now, when we talk about dependencies, we should delineate that there are other categories of dependencies. There are actually 3 categories of dependencies that we can talk about. And so we go through these. The first of which would be described as human dependencies. And one of the things, particularly for parents, that's difficult for them to grasp is the notion that they tend to be #1 on the list of human dependencies. And that the nature of the relationship that they have with their child is characterized by the fact that their child views them as an object that can be used in the maintenance of a developmental vacation, as opposed to seeing them as a parent in their life and seeing them as someone who actually has influence in their lives beyond their capacity to just control their stuff. It's very, very difficult. And you know, the thing about this is that typically as we're talking to parents, particularly parents who are interested in being responsible parents, they struggle with this idea that, gee, my child doesn't seem to see that I really want the best for them. They don't recognize that I love them after everything that I've done for them. This is kind of how they treat me. They have no problems whatsoever lying to me. They have no problems stealing from me. They have no problems in doing whatever it is that they think they rightfully can do to maintain this position in their life. And it's hard for parents to understand, well, really, because your child doesn't have a parent-child relationship with you. They have a relationship with you as an object. And they are actually taking advantage of the fact that you are going to be that responsible adult in their life, that you will be the individual who is experiencing some degree of distress or anxiety as a result of your child's failure to move forward in their lives. And as long as you are the individual that experiences those negative emotions, then your child will capitalize on that, and you will be the one that will be engaged with whatever level of energy that you can to try and correct the problem while your child remains on the developmental vacation. The implication for that is that your child now becomes incredibly gifted in their ability to make you or to have you experience unpleasant emotional material, that they know precisely what they need to do in order to have you begin experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, perhaps even a lot of shame or some guilt, those kinds of things, because they know that for you those negative emotions will marshal a lot of energy for you, and you will be doing whatever it is that you need to do to try and fix the situation. But in spite of all of your efforts, the situation doesn't tend to get remediated. What tends to happen is that the parents, as parents, you just reinforce the notion that the child tends to continue to be in control of the relationship. And they get better and better at making it so that you as a parent are the one that's trying to fix something that ultimately you're not going to be able to fix. The other piece here, too, as far as human dependencies, the other thing that we need to talk about and for parents to recognize is that for adolescents, their friends do tend to become dependencies as well. And particularly adolescents who are on developmental vacations, because they will now find those others in their lives who also could be considered to be on a developmental vacation. They tend to validate each other, they tend to reinforce each other. Those adolescents who remain on a developmental vacation don't tend to seek out other individuals who are in a more achievement-oriented place in their life, because they're not going to validate each other. The achievement-oriented individuals tend to be those guys that figure it out. It's like, okay, if there is something, if there is some level of influence that I think that I need in the world, then I'm going to have to do what it takes to get that. Whereas someone who remains on a developmental vacation tends to be of the notion that if there is anything to be had in the world, then someone else is going to drop that in their lap. Someone else will provide that. There will be some external entity of some nature that will provide that. It shouldn't be me that does that. It's that rather immature center of the universe, egocentric orientation. So the two human dependencies that we're talking about then are from parents or whoever that individual is going to be in my life, that I can engage to do my work instead of me, and then whoever else it is that I can engage, usually my friends and my support system, those individuals that I consider to be my support system, whoever that I can engage to validate me, to provide that validation that this place where I am in my own life is the way that it needs to be. So as we progress to the second category of dependencies, these are those more traditional dependencies that get a lot of airtime, so to speak. These tend to be those substances as well, and I think there's another category, but primarily we talk about substances, anything that I can bring into my life to insulate me from my immediate emotional experience. And for any reason, should I be experiencing some sense of urgency, some sense of anxiety, some distress at all about the life that I may be living or the expectations that I may encounter in my life, rather than experience those emotions and engage some energy towards a corrective function of those emotions, I have a pretty immediate way of insulating myself from those emotions as well. And it's going to be very convenient and readily available, and it gives me an immediate escape from actually having to find a more adaptive way of coping with the emotional material that I'm experiencing. And I think if you've been working with adolescents for any length of time, you find that it doesn't necessarily always have to be just drugs that we're talking about here, or psychoactive substances, but there can also be food and those other kinds of things as well that adolescents tend to bring into their lives for some kind of comfort. In the traditional dependencies as well, I think we find that there are what could be termed as somewhat psychologically oriented dependencies that happen here. Those kinds of things that tend to be labeled as defense mechanisms. That it's very easy for me to become dependent upon those and being able to use any of those as a means of moving other people around on my little chessboard of life. At times, things like my diagnosis becomes a dependency as well. That it makes it so it gives me my own personal sense of normalcy in my life. And I'm not really wanting to get rid of it. I'm using that as a means, once again, of insulating me from really the reality of my life and the reality of what level of responsibility I need to take in my life, given that this is the reality that I do have. So there's a number of those things that they tend to be very familiar for us that have been seeing adolescents and even adults as well. The defense mechanisms in particular are things that tend to manifest themselves as a dependency for anyone who is on that developmental vacation. Then we have that third category as well, the process dependencies. And for adolescents, these are the things that tend to emerge for them from the realm of cyberspace, so to speak. This is where I am now engaged in my life. I'm putting life energy into my world, but the life energy that I'm putting into the world is typically in the creation of an avatar more so than it is actually creating myself as an identity or creating my own personality. I'm becoming incredibly skilled as an avatar in whatever world that I'm in, you know, in the online gaming, in the social networking sites, in the online pornography, whatever this looks like we have it back. Okay, so as we're talking about this then, one of the things that parents and treatment providers need to recognize that, gosh, you know, a student or a client who is on a developmental vacation has become very, very adept at being able to stay on developmental vacation, and they become incredibly gifted in their abilities to ensure that their dependencies can continue to be delivered in their lives. And this is one of those things that tends to take an awful lot of energy for parents, and they again become very frustrated and confused at times when in their attempts to limit their child's access to dependencies and begin finding out how incredibly gifted their children are at ensuring that the dependencies are going to be there, and ensuring as well that parents really don't know that they are continuing to be able to have their dependencies. This is what tends to make the treatment of an out-of-control adolescent particularly difficult in an outpatient setting, because it's very, very hard for a parent to be able to control all of those dependencies. Okay? So talking about treatment then, and again, helpful information here for parents especially, they need to understand, you know, there really is two components that goes into the treatment of an adolescent who is on a developmental vacation. The first of which, and that which tends to be the most important, is disruption. And I think, okay, so the first part as far as disruption is concerned is that idea that in order for treatment to take place, the entire dynamic which originally created that developmental vacation, and whatever the dynamic may be that is sustaining the developmental vacation, it must be disrupted. And the reason is that as long as the adolescent is still in command of any of his or her dependencies, then it really doesn't matter how masterful of an intervention we enact. It will have little to no impact whatsoever. As long as the dependencies are still available, and as long as the adolescent is in control of those dependencies, then there's not going to be much of an impact at all, right? So that first element must be So yeah, as we were saying, as long as that child has the capacity to ensure that delivery, then no treatment intervention will have its intended effect, because they're still maintaining the dependency on whatever that dependency is to do the work for them. The second component then for treatment of an out-of-control adolescent is referred to as integration more than anything else. I think is probably the best way to describe this. And it can actually only take place at the point where the adolescent has now experienced themselves as an individual who can no longer call forth their dependencies, that they are in a situation, an environment, whatever that might be, where instead of being able to use their dependencies to manage the situation, they now have to begin exploring alternative coping mechanisms. And obviously, this is going to be where the process comes in. And there's going to be a lot of missteps with all of this, and there's going to be difficulties. But the adolescent must absolutely find themselves in a situation such that they have to examine what's actually there as opposed to using a dependency. So the integration piece tends to not occur until we're a little farther down the road, but the integration piece then assumes that after we have removed the developmental vacation, after the child has abandoned, we could say, the developmental vacation, now we need to figure out where do we reintegrate them into their developmental continuum. You know, they are adolescents after all, and ideally, we want them to be accomplishing the developmental tasks that they have in their lives, and so the integration piece would then be, well, let's get them back in their lives where they need to be with the appropriate level of support and structure so that they can successfully maintain the burgeoning coping mechanisms that they have developed without being too vulnerable to moving back into that more easily managed developmental vacation. All right, so here's the next piece, and here is the one that, again, I think parents are particularly somewhat relieved to get some of this kind of information, for them especially, to have an understanding of, gee, how as a parent can I tell? You know, how do I know? It's not just me somehow or another handing my child over to a treatment professional and then there's some kind of a magic thing that takes place. I insert him in the magic box and then I retrieve him at the other end and somehow everything is resolved and we're good. Really, we need the parents to be the ones that are an integral part of this treatment process. And actually, we need the parents as well to be those individuals who know specifically from their relationship with their child whether or not the treatment is having its intended effect. It's not them just taking my word for this or taking your word for it, but that they are buying into this and that they know from their own relationship with their child that we're making some progress. So let's talk about this, and for parents especially, if we've defined this for them, if your child is on the developmental vacation, then how do I know that we're moving beyond the developmental vacation? Well, in order to do this, then, we need to help illuminate for parents and those involved here some of the developmental tasks that go along with childhood. And typically for parents, if things are okay, if they've just been managing the kinds of ups and downs of the adolescent world and they realize, okay, there's going to be a little conflict here and there, but they're not picking up the phone calling somebody saying, hey, I think I need to get some treatment here, or I need to have my child seen by somebody, or I'm thinking I need to enroll my child into a program, whatever that might be, then typically they're not really paying attention to what the developmental tasks actually are. We just know it's okay. But if we have a child that is out of control and we're attempting some kind of treatment here, then we need to pay attention to the actual developmental tasks, because if they're on that developmental vacation, they're not accomplishing those tasks. We want to be able to use those tasks as well as a marker to help us understand, are we making progress or not? Is it really going in the direction that we need it to go? So as we talk about this, let's talk just a little about the developmental task of childhood, which is a fairly significant task for us all. And in reality, as we look at this and as we break this down a bit, we realize, gosh, you know what? It takes us 10 years of our lives in order to be able to accomplish this developmental task of childhood. And truly, if we don't accomplish it in the period of time where we should be addressing these kinds of things, it's going to be pretty hard for us to go back and catch up and regain this piece later on down the road. So as we set this up, let's understand this, and we'll pick it up when we have a child of about 3 years of age. And because we can tend to kind of start marking it at 3. At 3 is when our language and our neurodevelopment is such that we can begin processing this at the level that we need to. Now, ideally, if everything has gone well, if it has been good enough up until this time, if there has been good enough parenting, if there has been good enough nurturance, then typically at about 3 years of age, we have a child who is very firmly ensconced in the notion that they are the center of the universe, that their experience has pretty much been up to that time that the entire family dynamic now revolves around me. I came into this world and I have all of these people here whose schedules now revolve around me. And it means then as well that if there's anything that I think that I need or anything that I want, or something that I think I should have, it's going to appear for me. Someone else is going to provide that for me. And if I'm voicing my disapproval or whatever it might be, someone will be attending to that I have been the center of the universe. There's no question about that. And again, one of the things that is important to have parents understand in all of this is that at 3 years of age, it's a good thing to have a child who considers themselves to be the center of the universe. That means that they have been psychologically protected from having to deal with the reality of the fact that they are a very small, helpless child who has zero control over anything that's going on around them, and that we are living in a pretty out-of-control world and an unpredictable world, and that there's really not a lot of impact that I have. That, sooner or later we all have to come to grips with that notion, but it's best if we can do that at the point in our own development when we have adequate coping for that. And as a very, very little child, we don't have the capacity to cope with that. There are some examples. You probably have seen these individuals in your own caseloads as well. Those individuals who struggle with what typically may be referred to as difficulties with the reactive attachment disorder, or particularly individuals that you may have seen who spent the first 3 to 7 years in like an Eastern Black orphanage and those kinds of things. Now they did not have the luxury of being protected from that reality. And they didn't get a chance to ease into it, and that's why the world tends to be such a slippery place for them, and that's why the nature of the coping mechanisms that they latch onto remain incredibly primitive. And again, they keep that rigidity with us. But nevertheless, given that for the students that we're talking about, or the clients that we're talking about here, ideally we want our child to, at 3 years of age then, to be fairly entrenched in that idea, yeah, I am the center of the universe. But yet at that same time, our children are also going to begin a journey that starts with a series of existential crises, beginning at about 3 years of age as well. And just to maybe illustrate this, where we are, we'll give kind of a generic example of a 3-year-old who is making an appeal to one of his parents for a cookie or some other treat that he knows is up there on the counter. And the parent will say something to that child along the lines of, well, no, we're not going to have that cookie right now because we're getting ready to eat dinner. And I don't want you to spoil your dinner. Now, we forget as adults how a 3-year-old brain works. Because oftentimes we will make statements like that to our 3-year-olds, and we are thinking, well, here's how my 3-year-old is somehow processing it. They're thinking to themselves, you know what, I really don't understand the relevance of not eating a cookie right now, and or what this whole spoiling dinner concept might be. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. Because I'm pretty sure that I could eat a cookie or two right now, have dinner, and then be ready for a couple of cookies after dinner without any problem at all. But I'm thinking about this in terms of, well, gee, this is my mom talking here. And, my mom has obviously perspective, wisdom, and knowledge far beyond my own. And that I know that my mom loves me unconditionally, and that I also know that my mother would never ever tell me to do anything that was not in my best interest. And so, in spite of the fact that I don't completely understand why she would be telling me that I can't have a cookie right now, that it's beyond my capacity to understand that piece, I'm going to go ahead and defer to Mom on this one, because I know that she has wisdom beyond my own. Now, typically, however, that's not how a 3-year-old brain works. Right? When a 3-year-old brain hears something such as, no, we're not going to eat any cookies right now, that now becomes a threat. It becomes a threat to the only sense of existence that I have, and that is that of the center of the universe. And now, if someone is saying no to the center of the universe, in essence, they are challenging my capacity to maintain that position in the world. So structure coming from my mother or whoever it might be at that point right now becomes an incredibly threatening thing. And it is a call to arms, more or less. So I have to go to war with you. If I am going to maintain my position as the center of the universe, then I bring forth whatever it is that I think I need to bring forth to make it so that you will back off of no, so that you will recognize that I am this individual who is fully entitled to being the center of the universe. And I do whatever I have to do. I argue with you, I discuss this with you, I tantrum, I run down the hall and scream, I hate you, and slam the door. Whatever it is that I have to do to create a situation such that you will back off of no and give me the cookie. Say, oh, right, here it is. That's what I'm hoping will happen. Now, if I am successful in my efforts, if I wear you out, if I do whatever it is that I have to do, and I do it with an intensity to the fact that to the level that I can completely wear you out, and you give me the cookie, then I'm good. I have no real problem. I don't have a crisis. I am just reestablished in my place now as the center of the universe. I'm fine. Don't have to worry about anything, okay? If, however, you maintain, if you are able to keep your position as the parent in my life and keep that structure in place, and I don't wind up getting what it is that I want, now I have a problem. Now I have to start grappling with this difficulty that gee, what does this say about who I am? Someone just said no to me as the center of the universe. How does that work? How does this work that I don't always get what I want? Okay, and who does that say that I am? Now, this is where those very initial elements of that kind of identity development, we start breaking it out at this point right now. And there is a corollary that's attached to this as well. It's the idea that, gee, who are these individuals who are telling me no as well? Why would someone in my life tell me no? Why would someone set structure for me, with which I don't agree? Okay, what is that really all about? Who are these individuals who have the audacity to prevent me from getting whatever it is that I think that I need in my life? Now, I have to answer these two questions, and my capacity to do this is enhanced over the course of 10 years. I have to spend 10 years now. Not only am I growing up, but I have 10 years that I have to spend this time with those individuals in my life who are setting structure with me, and I need to see them as who they are in every setting. I have to spend this time with them to understand who are these people really, and how do I attach to them, and how are they attached to me, and the experiences that we have, not just when they're setting structure, but when we're sitting at the dinner table eating and having conversations, and when they're helping me with my homework, and when they're on the sidelines watching me play soccer, and when they're sitting in the audience listening to me recite my poetry, and whatever those things might be. So that at that point when I'm 13 or 14, and it can't be even coincident with that period of neurodevelopment that I get in my prefrontal cortex as an adolescent, it's that same time where it finally occurs to me, hey, all right, I get it. The situation that I have in life and that my parents have provided for me is not because I'm the center of the universe and I'm entitled to this. It's because they actually care about me and love me, and they want the best for me. And I've had 10 years of watching them, realizing that, my best interest is primary in their mind and everything that they do. And I can realize that, so that now when I'm at that place where I'm at 13 or 14 or whatever it might be, I have this notion that when my parents set structure for me, I'm in a better place than I am when I'm 3, where structure is not necessarily threatening to me, but I realize that there is such a thing as benevolent structure, that there are individuals in my life who understand the world better than I do, right? And I have had those experiences with them, realizing that, okay, I can see that they have my best interests in mind, that in reality my parents have brought me into this world, and I'm living with them in this little kingdom that I'm with them now, but they're not trying to keep me here in this kingdom forever, and they didn't just bring me here so they could have somebody to boss around. They brought me here because they want to prepare me for a kingdom that's greater than the one that I'm in right now. That they're getting me ready for that adult world where they want me to be more successful. They want me to have as much influence in the world as I possibly can have. And that's the same thing that I want for myself. Now, ideally, then, this is where I want to be. This is that developmental, the resolution of the developmental task of my childhood, to coming to that understanding that there really is such a thing as benevolent structure, and that there may be someone in my life who actually knows better than I do what's best for me. Now, if I'm on a developmental vacation, however, and if I have been that kid who has had the capacity to make it so that everyone in my life backs off of no, or if there have been events in my life, if I have come into an environment where my caretakers really don't have my best interests in mind, if I come into an environment where I have chemically dependent parents, if I come into an environment where I have been kind of the object of years-long custody disputes where I get artificially elevated to the center of the universe, and I have all of the the adults in my life that are fighting over me, then I never really get to that place where I can engage my parents and see them as these individuals who are truly the purveyors of benevolent structure. Okay? Now, for those individuals who are on that developmental vacation, this truly is the goal to which we are attempting to achieve. This is what we're actually looking to achieve. That lets us know, all right, I'm moving off that developmental vacation. Okay? I've gotten to a place where I've actually had to experience my life in a manner such that I'm not using my dependencies to insulate me from the reality of the life that I truly have. And that now my work is to have those developmental experiences such that I can actually begin recognizing that not all structure is going to be a threat to me, that not all structure is an invitation for me to go to war. That's truly what I'm looking for. And the difficulty with this is, though, and again, you can probably understand this from your own caseloads, is like if I don't ever get to this place in my life, if I don't recognize that there is such a thing as benevolent structure in my life, and if there is no one out there that I can actually trust and conceive as being someone who kind of has this down, who has this whole life thing down, and I can look and say, yeah, I get it. They've been down the path before me. There is someone that I admire. There's someone I'd like to emulate, whoever that might be, and realize, gee, there's going to have to be some structure that's associated with that. If I don't ever get to that place, then it means that now I have to live my life such that every relationship that I encounter, I must be in control of that relationship. And every relationship that I encounter must validate me in that position as the center of the universe. And so, yeah, I become very, very good at accumulating relationships in my life that way, but I use those relationships, they have strictly a utilitarian value for me in that they must validate me, and typically those are the relationships that I am using to ensure that I am okay, because I'm not doing that for myself. I have no way of knowing how to do that for myself yet. That's not one of those things that I will have been able to understand. The only thing that I know about myself is that I'm very, very good at being able to use others at validating me. And it causes a lot of problems in my life, obviously. The other element of this is then, and this kind of relates more to the integration phase of the treatment, is that I can't actually move as an adolescent into the stage where I'm beginning to address the developmental task of adolescence until I get to this place where I can resolve the childhood developmental task. And the reason why this is the case is that as I move into adolescence then, I have to take a huge leap of faith in what it is that I am now going to do. You know, I've spent the last 10 years of my life here in I've spent the last 10 years of my life scrutinizing my parents at every turn here. And now I've gone to that place where I realize, okay, my parents are good enough, and you know, they're obviously not perfect, but they're okay to be my parents, and they're good enough to be my parents, and I see them as significant individuals in my life, and I respect them, and I love them, and I'll do what they want me to do. Okay? If I've gotten to that place, then I got to figure out, okay, so then what do I do with the next 10 years of my life? Do I just continue on this path of scrutinizing at every term all of the authority figures that I have in my life, whoever it might be, all the adults that I might encounter in my life, whoever that might be? Are they good enough to tell me what to do? Are they competent enough? Do they love me enough? Do they care about me enough? Am I continuing to do that in my life? Or do I have another task? And actually, yeah, we do have another task that we need to take care of here. And it requires that as an adolescent now, I have to take a huge leap of faith. And it won't happen unless I have that foundation of an understanding that, you know what, there is some benevolent structure out there. Okay? There are some people out there who really have my best interests in mind. They're not trying to manipulate me. They're not trying to screw me over. They're not trying to mess with me. They really do have my best interests in mind. And there is some structure. And now I have to take this huge leap of faith and engage in that structure as opposed to just avoiding the structure. And if I've been on a developmental vacation, it's going to be a huge risk for me because my sense of competency comes from being able to avoid structure. If I'm actually engaged in that structure, I'm taking a huge risk. And it means that for me, I have to take the risk that if I want some influence in the world, then I have to do whatever it might be necessary in order to achieve that influence. That there is a concatenated progression that I will encounter that leads me to that influence, that it doesn't just fall out of the sky and drop into my lap, and that I can't use my capacity to manipulate others to give that to me, that I actually have to earn that for myself. And it can be just as simple as realizing, gee, if I truly want the influence in the world that something like a high school diploma will give to me, then I actually have to go to school. You know, I have to do what is ever necessary. I have to go through all those steps. I have to go sit in a class with a teacher who I'm sure doesn't necessarily care all that much about me, and who may be presenting information that I might not necessarily find all that relevant. But I'm going to sit there and I'm going to write down the requisite notes, and you know, I will repeat this process 4 or 5 times throughout the day. And then I will go home and I will write the book report with its footnotes in its entirety and print it out, put that material in my backpack, take it to school the next day, and hand it in. I will do all of those things because I'm not at a place at that point where I'm expecting the rest of the world to recognize me as the center of the universe, or as being a guy who is entitled to having that influence without having actually paid the dues to get that. And in that process, then, as I find myself doing those things that I don't necessarily want to do, I am actually developing the knowledge, the wisdom, and the competencies that I need to develop in my life in order to create this actual identity. I'm beginning to find out truly who it is that I am, and I am seeing myself now not so much in terms of the self-esteem that was so important when I was a much younger child, when my sense of self, particularly up until about the age of 6, when my whole sense of myself was dependent upon the adults in my life and self-esteem was everything. Now, I am now worried more about this notion of self-efficacy, the idea that I am becoming a potent human being in the world, not because everybody else is sanctioning this for me, but because I am now in a place where I have the capacity to engage in the world and in the structure of the world and develop this wisdom and this knowledge and these competencies that come along with this. Now, there's another part to this, and it's one of those things that I think we tend to skip over as treatment providers and those of us that are involved with program development. You know, when we start thinking about the developmental task of adolescence, and it's a piece that I think is incredibly important. And that is that I think the best way to illustrate this is to realize that there is kind of a step in our developmental progression. Again, if it's going okay, we're not really thinking about this. But if it's not going okay, it's something that becomes very, very prominent. It becomes a piece that you realize, hey, this is really missing here. This is the part that's actually missing. And it's that idea that as an adolescent, ideally, we want to have a lot of experiences where we find ourselves doing something that we don't particularly want to do. It's not immediately enjoyable. There may not be that immediate delivery of enjoyment, whatever it might be, okay? That might actually even be difficult for us to do, that we don't know how to do this, that we may be failing in doing whatever it is that we are doing, whatever that might be. But yet at the same time, we realize, well, no one is actually forcing me to do this. I made the decision to do this, and I am doing this because. And you know, typically I think about this, I think the piece that for me is most familiar, and the part that I relate to thinking back at my adolescence, is realizing that as an adolescent, I had a lot of jobs that were really not very enjoyable, and that I had a lot of friends who didn't necessarily have to work as much as I did, and who were out doing other enjoyable activities and would constantly be encouraging me to you know, bail out of my job or call in sick or something like that. But it's that notion that, no, I'm here, I don't really necessarily like being here, it's not really all that much fun, this is not a career position, you know, obviously it's just one of those entry-level jobs that might be out there, okay? I don't necessarily want to be here, but I'm here and I'm doing this because, okay? And for all of us, we have to fill in that blank, and you know, for an adolescent, that because may be still a pretty adolescent thing. Well, I'm doing this because I need to have some money, okay? And, you know, because nobody else is giving me money, I need to have money so that I can have whatever these accoutrements of my life that I might need, okay? That's why I'm doing it. But this is where this really starts. There has to have, there must be an experience where an adolescent now is self-disciplining to engage in something they don't necessarily want to do, that's not easy to do, but they have to fill in the blank. Well, I'm going to do this because. It's not because somebody's making me do this. It's because I have a specific reason for doing this. It starts at that level because now I have to start thinking about what truly is important in my life. You know, part of my identity has to have an element associated with it that tells me what's important to me. What do I really understand my life to be all about? And you know, by the time that I get to be about 19, now I really am starting to think about, well, gee, what is my purpose in life? What really is this all about? And ideally now I'm creating this identity that is focused around my understanding of what that truly is all about. Or I'm going to school, or I'm creating vocational experiences for myself, you know, whatever that might be. Now, the thing about this is that I don't ever really develop that identity as long as I'm on a developmental vacation. It doesn't happen. If I'm on a developmental vacation, the only thing that I'm worried about is making sure that everyone else is going to create an acceptable situation for me, that everyone else is going to make sure that I am okay. And so I'm not actually developing an identity while I am on developmental vacation, but I am getting very adept at carving an image for myself. And that image is necessary because I need others in the world to respond to this image in the way that I find it necessary, the way that they will validate me, and the way that they can make me okay. Now the problem is that as I progress along and as I then am allowed entry into the adult world and all of the privileges that go along with that, if I just have an image, then I'm going to self-destruct with that. I'm still going to have that expectation that the rest of the world is going to engage with me as though I am the center of the universe, that I can't control all those relationships, that it is everybody else's job to validate me more than anything else. And typically I'm going to self-destruct because when it doesn't work, when the image does not have its intended effect, the only thing that I have is to amplify whatever it is that I've been doing to create that image. And I tend to get more and more and more out of control in the attempt to force my image on others. Nevertheless, if I've actually gone through those steps of beginning to develop a true identity, and I've answered that question, well, this kind of sucks, but I'm going to do it anyway because then when I step into the adult world, I now have the discipline, I have the wisdom, I have the knowledge to continue to grow and develop in a more positive way. I'm not going to self-destruct. I'm actually now finding that I have that sense of self-efficacy that will help me achieve the goals that I have, given the reality we're in. So I think we probably are going to need to stop at about this place. I don't know if we left enough time for any questions. Is there anything? Okay. Are there questions here?
No questions at this time. We don't have any questions at this time. Do you want to wrap up, and then we can just continue with the end of the conclusion?
Okay. All right. Well, what we'll do then, I guess, is that we will continue along with those that are interested in this. A couple more webinars talking about, especially for treatment providers, then what does this look like? What does the nature of the treatment look like? And you know, what needs to happen within the course of treatment, and some more specifics as to, you know, how do we disrupt that developmental vacation? And again, realizing the idea here is that as we are treating those adolescents who are on a developmental vacation, we have a number of markers that we can use and that we can also use to with parents to engage them in this treatment process as well. And certainly I've found that over the years, as parents have come to understand this notion of the developmental vacation, it tends to be one of those things for them where they realize, whew, what a great relief in some way. That, and it opens up another portal for them to have some help and to also realize, well, gee, there are some distinct kinds of things that can happen and must happen in order for us to know that we're making the progress that we need to make. So here's the information, I guess, that you need to have as far as obtaining CEOs is concerned. And Monica will take over from there.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. So in order to receive your continuing education units, participants will need to sign up for Sovereign's continuing education program at the listed web link, www.sovinstitute.com. The presentation will be available to watch after about 72 hours. So sometime in the next 24 to 72 hours, you should be receiving an email with all the pertinent information and where you can go pick up your CE credits. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We're so glad that you could join us, and have a great afternoon.